Perfect. I think we have most of our waiting room is now in the meeting here. So first of all, welcome everyone. For those, it looks like I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces, which is awesome, and a few new ones, which is great. So for those who are here for their first club event, welcome. My name is Jason Moore. I'm the president of the Alumni Club here in Orange County. First of all, just want to say, how cool is this to have our first virtual event here in Orange County, and it's also one of the first virtual events across the country as a part of the Alumni Association. So this is a really cool experiment. So thank you for being involved with this. We hopefully will go this whole hour without any glitches, but if there are any, please be courteous and be kind of we're learning here. So, anyways, a few quick housekeeping items. The first one. You probably saw that when you joined the meeting that this meeting is being recorded. So that means all of our faces on the screen will be a part of the recording. So if you do not want to have your face be recorded for the hour, feel free to close the video portion. You can do that at the bottom along the bar there, looking at the video camera icon. So if you want to do that, you can do that now to hide your face. Maybe you have a quarantine beard that you don't want to be seen or showing right now. Feel free to cover that up if you want to, but we'd love to have, this is supposed to be a very interactive hour here, so we'd love to see faces. But again, if you do want to hide your face, feel free to do that now. Second, we are going to mute everyone throughout the presentation. Andrew has asked that this be interactive, like I said, so there will be times where we will unmute here and there. But for the most part, we're going to be muted. If you do have questions, which we hope you have a lot of questions, feel free to put that into the chat function of Zoom. So that's also, if you go to the bottom of your window there, you'll see a chat line or button. Click on that. Our VP of Membership, Justin, is manning the chat function. So if there are any questions that pop up there, both him and Andrew will see those and we'll address those. So. And finally, before we introduce our main event, we do want to thank the OSU Alumni Association there in Columbus for helping put this event on, as well as the rest of the alumni board here in Orange County. This took coordination across a few different parties to get this live, so want to thank everyone for their help with that. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started here. So most of us have probably already read a little bit about Andrew, but just to kind of do a quick introduction about him. So he is the CEO of Humor That Works. It's a leadership development company that teaches professionals how to use humor to achieve better results. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're all here today. He's worked with many top organizations such as IBM, the UN, FBI, Procter & Gamble, the list could go on and on. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, named a visionary under 40 by Procter & Gamble's Alumni Network. And finally, as we learned yesterday, he prefers catfish biffs over Adriaticos. I know. Some of us are big Adriaticos fans. I don't know how we feel about that, but I promise this will be an awesome hour. He's an amazing person, and we're really excited to have him here. So Andrew, thank you. And if I can get a virtual round of applause and welcome for Andrew Tarvin. Andrew, I'll throw it to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for the virtual round of applause and for spending your lunch hour with us today. I was incredibly excited to be coming to Orange County previously when this was going to be an in-person event, mostly because Orange County is the only county in the United States that you can get both Portillo's and In-N-Out, which I am a huge fan of both of those. I was definitely planning on a milkshake battle between the chocolate cake milkshake from Portillo's and the Neapolitan shake from In-N-Out, but that'll have to be something that we do in the future. So I'm excited to be coming to you live virtually from New York City. And I'm going to do a couple of things today that are a little bit different. We're playing with some technology elements because even though it is a virtual experience, we still want to kind of heighten the experience of it a little bit more. I'm coming to you live from New York City. I live here in the East Village with my fiance. We live in a 400 square foot apartment, so even smaller than the dorms, I feel like, or the residence halls back at Ohio State, it feels like sometimes. The other day, we built a pillow fort just so that we would have a new room to explore. So we're managing that. We keep rearranging the furniture as well because we just have a lot, like it's like kind of going into a new room almost. It's not really feng shui so much as like feng shui too much time on our hands. But what I want to talk to you about today is humor. And this is something that for me began in many ways at Ohio State. For a little bit of background, probably the most important thing to know about me is that I am a nerd. And if you are wondering what type of nerd, the answer is yes. Like computer, math, sci-fi, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars, Star Trek, Starbucks, all of them. But most specifically, I'm an engineer. And as an engineer, I've always been obsessed with efficiency. You know, ever since I can remember, really since before I can remember, because I was born 3 weeks early. So apparently even in the womb, I was like, I don't need a full 9 months. I'm ready to go right now, right? Let's do this, Mom. But in school, for me, I remember thinking that SMART was getting a 93% in all of my classes because a 93% was the lowest grade you could get and still get an A. And it got to the point that if I got a 94, 95, or worst case scenario, 100%, I was upset because it meant that I did more work than I had to do, right? Obsessed with efficiency. So I went to The Ohio State University, got a degree in computer science and engineering. And while I was at Ohio State, I became an RA, a resident advisor. And I don't know if we have other RAs here with us today. You can kind of share that in the chat if you were also an RA. But for me, as an RA, I was very fortunate because I was in Smith Hall before it was a super building, when it was just Smith Hall. And I was paired up with another RA named Amy. And together we were responsible for 46 incoming freshmen. And Amy and I actually worked really well together as a pair because she, you know, if I'm a stereotypical nerd, which I think I am in some ways, I have a skinny body, nasally voice, allergy to the sun, right? So if I was a stereotypical nerd, Amy was a stereotypical mother hen type person, like someone who always put relationships first and was always helping other people before even her own schoolwork. And so we worked really well together because you know, I was really good with the paperwork and she was really good with the humans. And together we worked well, and she would do things like help to set up programming. And I remember winter quarter, this was when we were still on quarters at Ohio State. Winter quarter, Amy was like, I think we should do a floor dinner for all of our residents. And I was like, yes, let's do that. It'll be super easy. We'll take everyone to Baker Commons. We'll use our meal plan. It'll be the easiest program ever. And she's like, no, I want to cook for our residents. I was like, that seems a lot less efficient. But Amy was in charge of programming, so that's what we did. So we cooked one of the things that you cook a lot of when you have a lot of people, spaghetti. And what I should say is that I am not a cook. Even to this day, I don't really do much cooking aside from making Skyline chili dip from time to time. About the most advanced thing that I can make is Pop-Tarts. And like, I don't even put them in the toaster oven. I just eat them raw. So I'm not a cook. Definitely wasn't at that time either. But I wanted to help Amy out on the night of the floor dinner. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to watch what she does and repeat that. And so I watch Amy and I see her. She gets, you know, a pot out. She puts it on. She fills it with water, puts it on a burner, turns the burner on, lets water boil, and then she puts the spaghetti in. And it's like, okay, I can do that. And I can do it more efficiently. So I take out a pot, I put it on the burner, or I fill it with water, put it on the burner, put the spaghetti in, then turn the burner on to let the water boil. And that's wrong. I don't know if you know this, but that is wrong. You can't boil the water, or you can't put the spaghetti in before you boil the water. And Amy flipped out. She like rushed over, she dumped everything out. She's like, what are you doing? You can't do this. She's like, listen, you just get out of the kitchen. And so I leave, I go and talk to the residents, and Amy cooks everything. She cooks the spaghetti, she makes the garlic bread, she puts together the salad, all of that kind of thing. We do the dinner, goes well, residents enjoy it, they leave. And Amy and I start talking and as we're cleaning up afterwards. And I could sense that Amy was still mad at me, mostly because she said, I'm still mad at you. Even as an engineer, I'm perceptive. I can at least pick up that. And I was like, I'm sorry, I've never made spaghetti before. And she's like, no, I'm mad because you always do this. And it's like, how can I always do this if this is the first time we've cooked together? And she's like, I'm not talking about cooking. She's like, you always try to take shortcuts. You always try to do the least amount of work possible. You do it with your schoolwork, you do it with your residents, and you do it with me. And that's when I realized Amy was right. Right? I was treating each one of my residents like a task list. I was like, okay, I spent 3 minutes with that person, 3 minutes with that person, 3 minutes with that person. I'm an amazing RA. But you all already know that that's not how relationships work. It's not how humans work. And instead of being efficient, we have to learn how to be effective. But for me as an engineer, I didn't necessarily have the skills I needed to be effective with people. But I started doing improv and stand-up at Ohio State and later learned that a lot of the same skills you need to be effective as an improviser or as a comedian or when using the skill of humor actually make you more effective in the workplace. And that's what we're going to talk about today over our virtual kind of hour together. Now, it is virtual, like I said, so there's a couple of things that we're going to do to try to make this a little bit more interactive. The first is I do want to try to take advantage of the chat, right? That's a great way for us to be able to kind of have a little bit of a conversation. So to test that out a little bit, I would love for you in the chat to type where you are zooming in from. Right, so many of you are going to be in the Orange County area, so you might give a more specific neighborhood or a more specific area. But go ahead and type in the chat where you are zooming in from, and that'll give us just a sense of where people are coming in from. So I know Leslie is joining us from Ohio, and Maggie as well. Shout out to them. We've got Ladera Ranch, Tustin, Irvine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these places correctly. I haven't spent much time there. Right, but very cool to see the variety of where people are coming in from. I'm also curious, since we are alumni here, I'm curious what your major was at Ohio State. So go ahead and type that in on your chat as well, your major at Ohio State, just so we can kind of get a sense of the group out there. Linguistics and German, we got a smarty pants in there. That's impressive. My fiance is German, so she would love that. Mathematics, Bachelor of Science, electrical engineering. Yeah, shout out to my engineers. Fellow computer science, Barbara, I love it. Business, right? So we've got a wide variety of people joining us as well, which I think is very, very exciting. And that's part of the fun or part of the positives to a live virtual experience. Some things still in the chat. Santa Fe representing speech language pathology. Yeah, I love it, right? This is why I love connecting with fellow Ohio State alumni. Now, after I graduated from Ohio State, I started working in Procter & Gamble as a project manager. And I know as a project manager, it is important for us to start kind of every single meeting with an agenda. So this is going to be our agenda for today. We are first going to start right at 12, a little bit at 12, then we're going to have tech issues at 12:02. We didn't have any tech issues, right? So we were able to jump into things right away. Fantastic work from the entire team. I love it. 12:04, those tech issues would have been resolved, but we've already got that. 12:09, we have the agenda slide, so we're a little bit behind on my side, but that's okay. I'll make sure that we catch up. 12:12, so in a couple of minutes, we're going to share some stats about work. Then I'm going to make a reference to Disney, so be on the lookout for that. I'll then talk about the 3 fundamental truths that don't change whether you are in a virtual setting or otherwise. I'll share an embarrassing picture of me from high school. We'll talk about the reticular activating system. I'll show you a picture of puppies. It makes kind of sense in the moment. We'll talk about how happiness works. We'll do a little bit of a Q&A, and then I'll talk about an action you can take right now. At 1 o'clock, the presentation is going to end. You'll share the recap of what we talked about today with your significant other, roommate, cat, or maybe just on a blog or TikTok, if that's your thing, I guess. You'll decide that you'll try humor tomorrow. You'll go to sleep at some point, and then you'll wake up tomorrow and use humor to conquer the world, or maybe some of the projects that you've got going on around you. Right? So that's not just the next hour, but the next 15 hours or so. But essentially what we're going to be covering is how to use humor to get better results both in work and life. Now, one of the things that I should say is that I am very used to speaking and having an audience, right? With improv as a background, stand-up, and then as a corporate speaker traveling around, I normally have laughter. And part of me, I considered using a laugh track. just to kind of have that sound even for myself. I considered, if I might say something like, a man once asked me if I wanted some free fish, so I asked, what's the catch? Or I might say something like, I like to live, or I like to eat my cereal at the end of the kitchen counter because I like to live life on the edge. I realized that's probably too much. I'd spend too much time within laugh tracks. So we're not actually going to do that. But all that to say is if you have something and you find something funny, feel free to put an LOL in the chat. If you have a comment or something that stands out to you, feel free to type that out as well. If there's something that kind of resonates with you, type that because that's going to help you to remember it a little bit longer. And again, we can have some of this engagement back and forth. Take advantage of the fact that we are in a virtual environment. So I'm curious, with a quick Y for yes and an N for no in the chat, how many of you are constantly learning? So put a Y in the chat and hit enter if you are constantly learning. Put an N if you're not. All right, so yeah, Y. Yeah, everyone is constantly learning. That's why you're on kind of a lunch and learn type call. Is there anyone who's done learning? Anyone who's like, nope, brain is full? No, probably not, right? You're here to learn, to grow, to do something. And whether it's learning a little bit more about virtual environment type stuff, whether it's managing the stress of day-to-day work, whether it's trying to find ways to stay more motivated or more connected with other people in a virtual environment, whatever it is, my guess is that it's going to be less about changing what you do and more about changing how you do it, right? So it's less about changing what you do and more about changing how you do it. Because if you think about work, and we're going to start with the context of work. If you think about work, no matter who you are, what you do, work comes down to 5 core skills, right? First, you have to be able to execute. You have to be able to complete a task. You have to be able to connect to Zoom or send an email or shave an alpaca if that's your job. I don't know. We might have alpaca farmers here. Who knows, right? But you have to be able to execute a task. Then you have to be able to think, right? You have to be able to strategically plan or solve problems or figure out why the Wi-Fi isn't working or how you're unmuted still or whatever it is, right? You have to think critically and creatively. Then you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to express your ideas in a way that other people can understand. You have to pick the right emoji for the text to give the right message of what you're saying across. You have to be able to connect at a human level, right? Emotional intelligence and empathy. And ultimately, you have to be able to lead. You have to be able to influence people to some type of common goal. So no matter who you are, what you do, your work comes down to these 5 skills. But it turns out that we, as Americans, aren't always so good at the how we do this work. Because 83% of employees feel stressed out at work, right? I'm sure some of you maybe feel like this woman in a CVS of you go into the grocery store and you're just looking for that one item and they don't have it because everyone's been stockpiling toilet paper and it's all you need and you just want to melt down in the aisle. Right? So we all kind of have that stress at work sometimes. Or 55% of employees are unsatisfied with their jobs. 55%, that's crazy. What's crazy though is in the United States, more people believe in ghosts than like what they do for a living. And that's crazy if you think about it. More people believe in ghosts than like what they do for a living. That means the average person is I want to kill my boss, but I can't because then they come back and haunt me. And there's something wrong with that statistic. And finally, 47% of employees struggle to stay happy. And of course, it's even worse in Disney World, where statistically only 14.3% of dwarfs are happy. That's 1 out of 7. Right? But it all leads to 70% of the workforce being disengaged, costing the U.S. economy an estimated $500 billion in lost productivity every single year. And what it's saying is that the current way of working isn't actually working. And consider the average day, especially right now, right? The average day isn't necessarily always about having the most exciting day. It's about, in some ways, just making it tolerable, making it feel like, oh yeah, having yet another Zoom meeting. I realize, I don't know if you all are like this, but I realize I'm lying a lot more in this virtual environment. The number one lie that I am telling is, I'm sorry, I have to run to another meeting. Right? I'm sorry I have to run to another meeting. When I say that, I'm lying 3 times. Because first of all, I'm not sorry, right? Because there's no reason some meetings should be 90 minutes, right? It's a lot of these meetings could be a lot shorter or should be an email to begin with. Second of all, I'm not running anywhere because I'm supposed to be socially distancing. I live in New York. It's pretty crowded when you go outside, so I'm not running anywhere. And finally, the other meeting that I need to go into is just not being in this one. Right? Because today the Zoom fatigue is real, dealing with, some people are dealing with trying to find motivation. It can be difficult to find motivation. Some people are finding it difficult to turn it off, right? Because when your computer is just sitting there, it's so easy to go back into work. Some people are finding the balance between having to educate their kids and be a parent and also still get work done. Other people are dealing with friends and family members who have health issues or are dealing with COVID specifically, right? There's a lot of things that are going on that are making our work challenging, making our lives challenging. But whether we are in COVID or not, whether we're in working from home or not, there are three things that still remain true about work and life. And this is what we're going to focus our conversation around today. Three fundamental truths that are true that I've found working with over 250 organizations all around the world on using things like humor in the workplace. The first fundamental truth is that you are what you repeatedly do. Right? As Aristotle said, you are what you repeatedly do, therefore excellent is not an act but a habit. Everything that you do defines who you are. So there is reason to believe that I am a somewhat funny person, all kind of laugh tracks aside. Because I've done over 1,000 shows as a stand-up comedian, improviser, storyteller, spoken word artist. My TEDx talk on the skill of humor has over 7 million views at this point. I have won comedy competitions before. That's the only time I'm going to win a belt like that, because I'm a frail person. I was born 8.3 pounds and then stayed that way till I was 15 years old. So the only way I'm going to win a belt like that is if it's a comedy competition. So there's reason to believe that I am, at least to some people, a little bit funny. And yet, when I went to my high school reunion, I grew up in Cincinnati. We were talking about this a little bit before the event started. I grew up in Cincinnati, went to Princeton High School. And when I went to my high school reunion for Princeton, and people found out that I did comedy, they're like, but you're not funny. And in some ways, they were right, because I will tell you that this is not the face of funny. There's a lot that's funny about this picture, but none of it is intentional. I've got the kind of blonde tips up top like I wanted to be in a boy band. I'm wearing Harry Potter glasses. The theme to this dance was Into a Dream. I am no one's dream in this photo, right? And growing up, I was never the life of the party or the class clown. In fact, if you know your personality assessments, I am a type A, blue square, conscientious INTJ with the sign of Aquarius. That means that I am a stubborn, ambitious introvert who likes long walks on the beach by myself. But what I have learned over time is that we are not our personality assessments, right? Our personality assessments like give us insight into our behavior, help us understand what motivates us, but they don't define us. Instead, you are what you repeatedly do. You are defined by your actions. And that's what happened to me. My best friend there in the middle wanted to start an improv comedy group while we were at Ohio State. He needed people and basically forced me to join. And as you can probably tell from this picture, we were not very good. At least when we first started out. We basically watched Whose Line Is It Anyway and then tried to repeat what we saw. But over time, we got better. We practiced 3 times a week in the Baker West performance space. We'd rent out that space. We'd perform there. We would do shows in residence halls as late night programming. So we were like in Morrill Tower, Lincoln Tower, all the different towers that we went to up on North Campus, in Burritos Noches, if you were there around the time that Burritos Noches was there. Right? So we did all these different events. And over time, with practice and repetition, we did get better. We went from performing in the basements of residence halls to performing twice a week at the Drake Theater when that was around in their black box space. And we got better the same way you get better at anything. And so I want to do kind of a quick activity to demonstrate this. So you can do this at home. I'm going to mirror it for you. All right, so what I want you to do is on your left hand, I want you to point forward like this. So go ahead and point forward like that. And then on your right hand, I want you to give a thumbs up. So you can do this, right? So you're pointing forward, thumbs up, great. And now just want you to switch the two. All right, and you can switch back and forth, and you don't want to have a gun. Some of you have guns, right? So it's just a thumb up, finger out. You're switching back and forth, back and forth. If it's a little bit of a challenge, I will say for some reason, like the Nordic track approach makes it easier. Like if you punch through it, makes the process a little bit easier. And you can keep on working on that if you would like. But I like that as a simple warm-up, warming up the left and right side of the body and warming up the left and right side of the brain. But it's also a great demonstration of something called the conscious competence learning model, or the 4 stages of competence, which says that no matter who you are, what you do, when you learn a new skill, you go through 4 phases. The first phase is non-conscious incompetence. You are unaware that you can't do something, right? So you're non-consciously incompetent, unaware you can't do something. So then you try it out and you realize it's a little bit harder than you expected, and you become consciously incompetent, which is actually an okay spot to be in because you at least recognize that there's a gap between where you are and where you want to be. Then you take a workshop on this. You spend like an entire weekend practicing it, or really about 5 minutes of concerted effort, and get to the point that you are consciously competent. When you think about it, you're able to do it. And then finally, with more practice and repetition, you get to the point that you are non-consciously competent. Right? You don't even have to think about it. You're able to do it. And that's true for any new skill. It's true when you're first learning how to walk. It's true when you're first learning to ride a bike. And it's true for things like learning virtual technology. Because for some people, they might be getting frustrated, like, how am I going to possibly learn Zoom and all the ins and outs? How do I learn things like breakout rooms or using the chat feature or get connected to these types of things? And just recognize, right, with practice and repetition, it all becomes a little bit easier, all becomes second nature. Because again, you are what you repeatedly do. And if you want to be a humorist, then that just simply means you start creating humor. What a humorist does is they create, they write ideas down, they share thoughts, they put it on Twitter, or they do a show with it, or they share it with friends. They deliver it, right? So they've written it down, they deliver it, and then they review it. They go back and do that process over and over and over again. And that's something that can still happen during our current situation. You see that on late night talk shows. They're still doing their brand of humor from their homes. We're doing virtual stand-up shows and virtual improv shows and storytelling shows so that people can kind of share their message and idea around the world. You've seen very fun things like the Getty Museum doing fun humor challenges where they're encouraging people to recreate pieces of art at home. So you have this painting here with the dog. Some people are using their clothes. I think this is a pretty impressive horse. You've even got Dali, right? Dali's never looked so delicious with this bologna sandwich that someone has created, right? So it's just finding fun ways to do things, because if you are a humorist, even in a virtual environment, you can find ways to have a little bit of fun. So that's kind of our point, or fundamental truth number 1, is that you are what you repeatedly do. Second point is that you are the author of your own story, right? You are the author of your own story. For me, my kind of author story started at Procter & Gamble. I remember being about a year into the company when I received this email. And it's a pretty nondescript email. In fact, it feels almost slightly aggressive. The first comment is, "Are you a comedian?" And what follows, though, is a message from a woman named Marnie who had done some research, had found out that there were benefits to using humor in the workplace, and she asked if I would be willing to give a presentation as a comedian. Could I come in and talk about it? So I did that. I did 20 minutes of stand-up about Procter & Gamble, and then I did 40 minutes of kind of summarizing some of this research that was found in the Harvard Business Review and other peer-reviewed journals. And I fell in love with the work. I realized that speaking was stand-up with a message. And so I proclaimed myself the corporate humorist of P&G. I got business cards made, I started an internal blog, and I kind of assumed someone would stop me. Right? Someone from HR or legal would eventually come up and be like, "Hey, you can't just create your own job title." But no one ever did. Instead, people started referring to me as the corporate humorist. And I started to do more and more work. I started to write articles about things like unleadership, and I started to do internal jingles programs, and just overall starting to have more fun. And the more work that I did around humor, the more I started to see it. And that's when I learned about the reticular activating system. And this is going to be a very gross oversimplification of it, so I apologize for the true neuroscientists in the call today. But my basic understanding of the reticular activating system is that it's a part of the brain with one of its function being that of selective attention, with the idea that the brain is constantly bombarded by information. And the brain has to decide which information does it elevate to the conscious level and which information does it kind of let go by. Otherwise, we'd be too overstimulated all the time. So that's one of the roles of the RAS, is selective attention. And it's kind of that phenomenon where, like, if you buy a certain type of car, or a friend of yours buys a certain type of car, you then start to see that car show up everywhere. Right? It's not necessarily that there are more of that car on the road. It's just that you now have selective attention towards that idea. And what we see is partially dictated by the input we give our brains. So for example, we've all seen the FedEx logo hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of times. But sometimes, for the first time, if I say look for the arrow, some of you have seen the arrow before, but some of you are just now noticing the arrow between the E and the X of the FedEx logo. One that you've never seen before, but now you start to notice it because the input has changed. The same might be true for the 31 in the Baskin and Robbins logo, right? Creating the B and the R of the original 31 flavors. Or I could say with Tostitos, look for the people holding a chip, right? There's actually two people holding a chip and dipping in the actual logo itself. And finally, this one's a little bit harder to see. The Hershey's Kisses logo has a sideways kiss in between the K and the I, right? By now starting to give you different information, it starts to change what it is that you see. And so the question is, what are you telling your brain to look out for? Because if you're in a situation where you're very highly stressed and all you do is look for all the things that happen to be wrong, and that's the thing that you're constantly feeding your brain, then you're only going to see the things that are wrong. Versus if you say, act like a humorist, and you start to say, let me try to find the humor in each one of these situations, you start to notice the humor in the world around you. Because your thoughts and focus become the lens through which you see the world. And I don't think that funny things happen to funny people, but rather funny people see the world in a funny way. And the way that we do that is by exposing ourselves to positive messages. What feedback are you giving yourself? Are you watching regular news, or can you watch sometimes Some Good News with John Krasinski and finding some of the positives out there? You can do things like attend social distancing festivals. You can see art and science and dance from all around the world completely for free, live streaming for different events. Even things like your webcam, right? You can change. If you don't have access to a webcam, or you don't necessarily like your view, or you're just kind of getting used to it, go on EarthCam and find a stunning beach to look at. Or maybe you miss the snow. Maybe you really miss New York City and you want to see Times Square, which is very empty right now. Or maybe you just want to see puppies, right? Images of puppies just bring a smile to your face, change the way that you're viewing things a little bit. So that is our next kind of step. It is you being the author of your own story. So I want to do a quick activity. We'll see if this works. I want to do the quick activity before we go into the last exercise. This is going to be taking advantage of what is called breakout rooms in Zoom. If you're not familiar with breakout rooms, you will be randomly paired with another person who is also in attendance today. You will need to unmute yourself for the activity to be able to kind of share things back and forth. But it's going to be a pretty simple exercise that we're going to do. All right, so I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. And what you're going to do is you're simply going to answer the question back and forth with each other, what's not wrong with your life? Okay, you're just going to answer the question, simple question of what's not wrong with your life. Okay, so I'm going to send you into these breakout rooms. You're going to have about 2 minutes to do it. You'll be paired with one other person. So we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to create breakout rooms. Like I said, you're going to have about 2 minutes for this exercise. You're just going to go back and forth answering the question, what's not wrong with your life? When you go into the breakout room, be sure to actually unmute yourself so that you can have that conversation. All right, so we're going to go ahead and send you that way. All right, and welcome back. We're starting to get people back into the room. So I'm curious, in the chat, go ahead and share, how was that exercise? Easy, hard, fun, dumb? You maybe learn something about the other person, get a different perspective. Share your kind of thoughts in the chat. Yes, Dwayne says easy. Maggie says great. Made me smile, right? Yeah, so it's a pretty simple exercise, but can kind of make you smile. But as a reminder, again, like we said, we're talking about right now that you are the author of your own story. And part of what your story becomes is the input that you give to it. And I remember hearing this advice pretty on in my career where someone asked the question of, if someone wrote a book about your life, would anyone care to read it? And over time, I've actually refined that statement, at least for myself. And it's not just that, but it's like, if anyone wrote a book about your life, would you care to read it? And if at any point, if you're reading your own story and thinking like, why is the main character doing that? Why is the main character focusing on the things that are wrong as instead of all the things that are actually going well? Or why is that character stuck in this, this either job or relationship that they don't actually like without trying to improve it? Or why is this person not following that passion or at least building on that hobby that they really love? If at any time you'd be reading that story and wondering those questions, remember you're the author. You can change the next page of that story. And part of it is based on what you input to your brain. And that brings us to the last fundamental truth, which is that you are responsible for your own happiness. Right? You are responsible for your own happiness. I learned this from a person that I worked with at Procter & Gamble. Because as a corporate humorist, I would continue to find ways to add humor into my work. I would give different team members, we would do different personality assessments, like the Myers-Briggs, but we'd also do ones like, which Star Wars character are you? That was R2-D2. We would give our projects fun names like Project Optimization. We would do interactive exercises before the meetings would start, just as a way to get to know each other a little bit better. Overall, we would find ways to have fun. And I remember coming out of a meeting one day, and my coworker, Ewok, pulled me aside, and she was like, Drew, I just want to thank you. I was a little bit taken aback. I was like, I didn't know why she was thanking me, so I was like, it is about time. Why are you thanking me? And she's like, oh, for this project. It's been fun. And I was like, yes, right? Finally, someone else who appreciates the joys of Bayesian probability and predictive analytics. Am I right? She was like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, you've made the project fun. Thank you. Before I joined Project Optimization, I was stressed out. I was burned out. I was, tired of coming into work. I would dread Monday morning because it was just going to be a long week. And honestly, I was thinking about quitting. And then I joined your team, and you did things differently, right? You did teach us improv exercise. You made sure that we had fun. You always included a picture of yourself in your presentations just for fun and the storytelling and all these things. And she's like, I realized that at some point, no one ever told you to do those things. You just decided to. And then I realized Ewok was right, because no one ever told me to use humor in the workplace, but no one ever stopped me either. And a lot of people assume that they can't use humor at work for whatever reason. Maybe because there's not a culture of it, maybe because everyone seems to be so serious, maybe because stress is high or the work that they do is serious. But the reality is, I always assumed that I could, and that's been the key difference for me. So as we think about your own work, you start to find ways to incorporate a little bit more humor. Because the truth is, to be happy at work, you don't have to do what you love, but rather love what you do. Right? You don't have to do what you love, but rather love what you do. And that's an important but subtle distinction between those two. Because a lot of times people have a misunderstanding or misconception of what comes first. So I'm curious in the chat, go ahead and share, which do you think comes first, success or happiness? Right? Which one do you think comes first, success or happiness? Share that in the chat. What do we think? All right, so we're seeing a lot of people saying happiness. We get a couple people saying success, right? A lot of us believe that success comes first. We think, okay, I got to do well in high school so that I can get into a good college like Ohio State. And then when I go to Ohio State, I got to do well and try to get onto the dean's list and also maybe join up with some of these different organizations. And I've got to volunteer and all this other stuff so that I can get a good job. Okay, once I get a good job, I got to do well so that then I get promoted and I can then like buy that car or that new house or whatever. Okay, once I buy that new house and that car, maybe that's when I'll be happy. But you know, that's not how happiness works. And a great point from from what Christy said is happiness is success, right? I used to think that if I was successful, I would be happy. But I've now realized that if I'm happy, I am successful, right? That's a great distinction, a great flip on these things because of how humans work, right? Humans have hedonic adaptation. It can be a good thing, right? When something negative happens to us, we are negatively impacted for a while, right? Everything that's going on right now that's going to bring some people down. But over time, you will return back to your base happiness set point. That's a good thing. That's called resilience, right? It's how we survive through all manner of different situations. However, the exact same thing is true for things that make us happy or positive things that happen to us. They will make us happier for a period of time when we get that car, that promotion, or we can go back to work, or we can have sporting events again, or whatever it's going to happen to be that's going to make you happy. And then that's going to also go back to the norm, and then it starts to become an element of entitlement. Right? We feel like we are entitled to that, and we no longer have that same euphoric high from those same events. But the reality is, if you can find joy in what you do, you actually do those things better. So happiness, and studies from positive psychologists, precedes success. And I do want to make a quick note that staying positive doesn't mean that you have to be happy all the time, right? It simply means that even on the hard days, you know that good ones or better ones are coming, right? That's what we mean by staying positive. So there's 3 ways that we can kind of control or help to at least improve our own happiness. The first is gratitude, right? Is saying thank you more. Because in studies, they have found that if you keep a gratitude journal where you write down 3 things each day that you are grateful for, then after about 2 weeks or so, typically people's optimism and overall positivity and their outlook on life improves. Because it changes your perspective. It changes what you are looking for. That's why I asked the question of what's not wrong with your life. Because it can be something simple. It doesn't have to be something so elevated. It doesn't have to be like, oh, everything is perfect, so that's what I'm grateful for. It can be simple things. I'm grateful for doing a virtual lunch and learn today. I'm grateful that a little bit later I'm going to eat some delicious cookies from a bakery called Levain Bakery here in New York City, right? They're amazing. I'm grateful that I can always connect and share great stories with fellow Ohio State alumni, and we can jokingly banter back and forth about how Adriatico's, while good, is still no comparison to Catfish Bis. These are things that I can be grateful for, right? So we can find those simple things that make us laugh, make us smile. The second thing that improves our overall happiness is our support system, is our support network, our social network. Because how we or who we interact with impacts our mood. Why Victor Borg said the shortest distance between 2 people is a smile. This is a picture of my nephew Theo. I intentionally put Theo in my presentations because when I see his picture, it makes me smile. When he smiles, I smile, right? And it starts to change my mood, starts to change how I interact. And this is why social support, particularly now, is so crucial. Simple things like having happy hours together and having a drink or playing board games, right? Or even in some scenarios, some people are getting married over Zoom, over virtual, right? They have the first Zoom meeting where the bride and groom were in completely different places. But who you surround yourself, who you talk with, those types of impact your mood, affect your mood. And the question is, who are the type of people you're hanging out with, and who are the type of people that you are, or what type of mood are you putting out there? Because I'm curious, I'm sure many of you know, maybe you can put a Y in the chat for this. Put a Y in the chat if you know someone who lights up a room whenever that person enters a room. Put a Y in the chat if you know someone like that, right? Most of you know someone like that. Very good, right? They tend to be pretty positive people. They tend to be people that make you smile, that make you laugh. Put a Y in the chat if you know someone who lights up a room whenever that person leaves that room. People know people like that? Right? Yeah, tend to know people like that. They tend to be negative people. They tend to be people that are like, I'm just playing devil's advocate. It's like, why? Right? No one necessarily asked you to do that. Those people, those positive and negative people impact your mood. Like psychologists have shown that moods ripple through social networks, much like ripples in water. Right? So who are you surrounding yourself, and can you be proactive about building relationships with people? And then finally, of course, humor is something that can help to improve your overall happiness as well. Because people who use humor in the workplace are more productive, less stressed, and happier. This is a picture of me at the end. I'm the baby. I'm the youngest one, all the way over. Where is it? There. Yeah, I'm the youngest of 3 boys, because practice makes perfect. And I'm so happy. Even though I have a boo-boo on my head, right, I'm still so happy. And humor can help us do that, because we can find things that are fun. And humor can be simple. It doesn't necessarily have to be about telling jokes in the workplace, although that can be a component. But these are a couple of examples of just people having fun, right? These are some sewer workers having a little bit of fun with their work. You know, Ninja Turtle search in progress. I like that. People say to try to recreate during this time, right? Try to recreate your normal experience as much as possible. So you can do things like this, right? Recreating the subway experience. You can have fun with virtual backgrounds and virtual meetings if you need to. So this is someone who had both a virtual green screen and a green shirt that they wore while in a virtual meeting, just having a little bit of fun. In fact, you can Google COVID humor and find tons and tons of examples of people having fun, even in the current situation. And it's important to recognize that humor, just because you use humor, doesn't mean that you don't take something seriously, right? Serious does not necessarily mean that it has to be somber. It's recognizing the human condition, recognizing that if we believe in our mission of whatever it is that we're doing, if we believe that it is important, then we should leverage every skill or tool that we have to be effective in that. Humor being one of the most effective tools that we have for engaging people, getting them to pay attention, capturing that attention, helping them improve things longer, right? All these 30+ benefits of using humor in the workplace are all things that we can take advantage of for anything that we think is important or necessary. And those are the 3 fundamental truths of work and life, right? You are what you repeatedly do, you are the author of your own story, and you are responsible for your own happiness. Now, I'm going to start to wrap up to share a couple of kind of next steps. If you have any specific questions, you can go ahead and share those in the chat. Also, I know we don't necessarily have a ton of time for those, but I'm also more than happy to chat with people afterwards. I'll give you my contact information for that. If you're curious about how did some of the technology things work, or what did you do at breakout rooms, or all that, also more than happy to answer questions around those. But as we start to wrap up, I want you to start thinking about what we've covered today. And as a result, what do you want to do differently, right? Because this is a summary of what we covered. And now sometimes people are like, okay, this was a session on humor. I didn't necessarily learn a lot of humor skills. And the reality is that you did, just through demonstration. Less about necessarily what I said, but more about how I said it. So for example, if you want to use humor in your presentation, start with a story. I started with a story about me going to Ohio State. You can start with a story that sets up the thesis or the theme of whatever it is that you're talking about. I also added some incongruity by showing a slide that gave you the minute-by-minute breakdown of what we're going to talk about and do, right? So you can add simple things like incongruity, just saying things a little bit differently so that people pay attention. You can create associations. I made a short association to Disney World, right? You can do that as a way to explain a topic or explain something that's typically a little bit more dry, but you can make it a little bit more fun by connecting it to pop culture or to a passion or a hobby of yours. We also talked about how to facilitate exercises, right? We did the thumbs exercise, something that you can take and have your team members do if you want as well. Have them do that exact same exercise, right? But you can facilitate these activities for people to actually do something. Same thing with the what's not wrong with your life. You incorporate images into your presentations. Rather than a wall full of text, how can you incorporate fun images? We looked at puppies for a short period of time. That's always fun. Right? You can do things like improvise, doing Q&A. This we kind of ran out of time for. That's my fault for talking a little too long, but you can do things like that and improvise, adapt in the moment. You can also share your observations, right? Make a little bit of humor about the situations where hopefully you will share with your significant other, roommate, or cat a little bit later some of the things that you've done today, and hopefully this is a positive highlight for them. And ultimately, you can go out and spread joy. You can simply do something that makes people smile. And that is my action item for you. That's what I'm going to encourage you to do, right? Because as a project manager, you got to start with an agenda, end on next steps. And my next step for you is to start, which is, I know, a terribly vague, awful action item. It's not even following the SMART framework. But the reality is that it does start with a choice. Right? Very rarely, very few people are going to tell you you need to make sure that you're having fun. Right? Some people will, but very few will. It's more often you need to work harder, you need to get this email done on time, or you need to do whatever, right? But you also need to tell yourself to have a little bit more fun. So if you are what you repeatedly do, define the actions that you want to live. If you are the author of your own story, change what you pay attention to so that you can start to write that story. And if you are responsible for your own happiness, seek out gratitude, support, and a little bit more fun. If you're curious about what we do at humorthatworks.com, this is where you can find out more about the skill of humor, about some of our, we've got plenty of free articles, a link to our book out there, information about coaching, etc. You can find all that at humorthatworks.com. More importantly, if you have questions or want to reach out, you can find me on Twitter or social media. So at Drew Tarvin is all on my social media, including that last icon is MySpace. I don't know why I'm still on MySpace, but apparently it still exists as a website and I'm still on it. So if MySpace is your jam, you can join me there. Website is drewtarvin.com. Email is drew@drewtarvin.com. And the last thing that I'll say is that humor is a choice, right? Like I said, humor is a choice. And the reality is that you choose every single day how you do your work. So why not choose to be more productive, less stressed, and happier? Why not choose to get better results and have more fun? Why not choose humor that works? Thank you all so much for joining us today on this virtual program. Like I said, I'll stick around a little bit to answer questions as people have them for sure. But hopefully this has given you at least an opportunity to smile today, giving you an opportunity to think a little bit, and giving you an opportunity to connect as well. And with that being said, I will turn it back over to Jason. I think I'm turning it back over to Jason. Yeah.
I think I'm good now. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. That was amazing. I want to give you, I guess we can't do a full clap, but like a virtual clap to say thank you. That was amazing. I think some of the things, I think all of us took something away from that. For me personally, the quote that you threw out there about if someone wrote a book about your life, would you read it? I think is a really interesting thing to think about. And this whole idea of humor as a choice. And I think that's so relevant with everything that's obviously going on in the world right now. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of the entire Alumni Association and Orange County Club and those of us that are on here. We do have a small gift for you. We will have to figure out a way to get it to you, but we have an Orange County, Ohio State Club tote bag, as well as an In-N-Out t-shirt and an In-N-Out gift card. So
oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, so we will. I would love to give that to you in person, but we'll work with Columbus to get that to you. And before I guess we sign off here, just a couple quick club updates for those of us that are still on the call here. The first one, I want some really exciting news. So we just got some numbers as far as the number of high school seniors that are going to Columbus in the fall to be Buckeye freshmen. We are up to 42 Orange County students, which is a phenomenal number. So want to say thank you to everyone that has either talked to a student maybe in their neighborhood about their Buckeye experience or anything like that, but that is an amazing number. So wanted to share that. Second thing is some more good news is our club. We just got official word that we retained the Scarlet Tier status, which is a status given to the top clubs across the country and the world. And so on behalf of the club, we just want to say thank you to all of our members who really make this a phenomenal club and one that we love to be a part of. And on that note, stay tuned for communications this summer as far as game watches, fingers crossed. We have football here in the fall, as well as a networking happy hour we're going to try to do in the September time. But again, thank you to our club members. And again, Andrew, thank you so much. This was a phenomenal hour. And again, thank you and go Bucks.
Go Bucks. Thanks all.
Go Bucks. Thanks, guys. And I think, Andrew, I don't know if you want to stick around for anyone that may want to stick around or.
Yep. Yeah. Happy to stick around.
The one question while people decide whether they want to stay or not or sign off here was one that we were talking about. And I'll be honest, when I was reading your bio and I heard humor engineer, I kind of made me go, Okay. What exactly is that? So just kind of
Yep.
curious, what is I'm sure you've had some funny interactions with people when you've told them you're a humor engineer and they're like, raise an eyebrow and they're like, what? Like,
What?
what?
What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times it's like, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
so, and it came from when I was doing my first, so I did my first TEDx talk was actually at Ohio State. And when I was doing it, I had to kind of like, they wanted me to give a title and I was like trying to think about what I did. And I was like, well, as a computer science engineer, I solved problems using computers. Now, in my company, I solve problems using humor. I think that makes me a humor engineer. Yeah, so most people kind of give me a weird look and then I explain. But a lot of people, especially when they read my bio, they say, this is Andrew Tarvin is the world's first human engineer. Which I'm like, come on, engineers, we're still technically human. Not the first human engineer, we're mostly
Yep.
human. But yeah, that's probably the most common thing that happens. And but no, it's been fun, and I realized just like a corporate humorist, people will call you whatever you tell them to call you.
Yep.
So like people now refer to me as like a humor engineer. So it is kind of an interesting thing for sure.
And it looked like I think Justin had a question here as far
Yeah.
as kind of how do you pick, I guess, balance the humor with also making sure people are taking you seriously? Any sort of
Yeah, so I mean, I think
feedback
the
or
big
that?
thing there is not using humor just for the sake of humor, not being like, I
Hmm.
guess I'm supposed to be funny, but more of like, okay, here, how do I use humor as a way to solve a challenge? And so what we encourage people to do is to use what we call a humor map. And so that stands for your medium, audience, and purpose. And medium just being, is it in a virtual meeting? Is it in an email? Is it in a phone call? Is it in conversation? Audience is like, who is that person? What do they know? What do they need? And also, more importantly, what is your relationship to them?
Hmm.
Right? Because a joke you and Justin might make with each other is going to be very different than someone like a client that you're meeting for the first time. And then finally, the most important is the purpose. Why are you using humor? Are you going to use humor at the beginning of a meeting so that people pay attention and that leads into kind of the thesis of the meeting? Or are you going to use humor in a one-on-one conversation to build rapport with people or that kind of thing? And so I think when you're intentional and clear about that, then people less often think, oh, wow, that's a bunch of humor. That story was so funny, and more about,
Yep.
oh, wow, that was a really smart way to start this meeting, or that was a really effective associate or like
Yeah,
metaphor
yeah, yeah.
that helps me understand things. That was a really cool kind of like quote that you just said. And so I think having that clear purpose can certainly help. And recognizing that, humor doesn't replace the work, right? You can't just be like, well, I'm not going to do as much around the workplace. I'm just going to make jokes instead. Instead, it's simply about how you do your work, not what you
Yep.
do, but how you do it.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. And look,
Matt asked a question, am I
yeah.
doing this on Wednesday for College of Business? Not that I know of. Are they talking about humor at the College of Business on Wednesday? They are. I'm going to have to find out who's talking about humor.
Yeah, somebody is. We got the email. I thought it was you, actually.
Oh, am I? I don't think that I am. Maybe I am. I don't know what my
Surprise.
calendar looks like. Whoever it is, I'm going to have to find that out. College of
Yeah.
Business, Ohio State, humor. We're going to see. Yeah, I'll Google and figure out who it is, or at least connect with them, find out more.
Yeah. Perfect. Looks like those were the questions. Let me see
Yeah,
the
cool.
chat.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and spending an hour together with us. Hopefully, yeah, you enjoyed the virtual presentation, and we're staying engaged. That's the additional challenge with virtual to do. But I didn't know that I was doing this for a Scarlet Club. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Whoop whoop.
Yeah. So I'm excited. I'm definitely gonna have to, when I can travel again, we'll definitely come out and we'll get that. We'll get in and out for sure.
Perfect. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks, Andrew, and thanks you, everybody, and go Bucks.
Yeah. Thank you all. Bye.